Throughout history, women have engaged in many aspects of life in the Jewish world. This month, as Mother's Day is around the corner, I want to share with you the names of just a few special women whose influence we still feel, though whose names we may have forgotten. I believe that their influence began in the biblical world and continues through our lives today. I'd like to share a few stories of those powerful women beginning in the biblical period and moving through and later into the rabbinic period and beyond. As we reclaim and examine the lives and women in history who helped shape us, it's my fervent hope and prayer that they will serve as an inspiration for us. As we examine this period, I want to remind us, beginning in the biblical era, that I'm not thinking about Eve, Miriam, or Yocheved, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam's mom. I want to focus on a different prophet. Well, prophetess, actually. And her name was Huldah. That's not to say that there's other women of the Bible who weren't amazing, like Deborah or Noadiah. They were the powerhouses in their own right. But Huldah and the prophet Jeremiah were contemporaries, and it's her message that I want to elevate. Both of those prophets had ideas, message, and even terminology that were similar. And Huldah's message is one of the few prophetesses' messages that were preserved in the Hebrew Bible, including the standard phrase, "So says God." It's believed that she was behind much of the reforms attributed to Hosea that began during her tenure as his royal prophet. She was so important that the rabbis went on later to memorialize her legacy by naming 2 of the 5 gates in the Temple Mount as Huldah's gates after her. Another area that's often overlooked is that of women biblical leaders. Much of the monarchy of ancient Israel is generally assumed to have been exclusively male, to the extreme extent that even in modern textbooks, the lists of kings or leaders are primarily male. The most famous queen I'd like to share with you is Athaliah, and she is even sometimes described in masculine terms, making it even more confusing. Furthermore, in Judah and Israel, queens did not have lower status, like they sometimes can in modern English or England terminology. And what some scholars have argued is that a better term for them is actually royal women of Judah and Israel. And it's her story, Athaliah's story, that I want to share with you briefly. She was the daughter of King Omri from the north, and yet she was able to rule Judah for 7 years, the southern kingdom. And of those 7 years, they were thought to have been peaceful, quiet, and prosperous. The biblical writers are silent about the specifics of those years, but they have in the past maligned other kings, so their silence speaks volumes as to her success. After the Bible was written, the rabbis saw themselves as the inheritors of that very special biblical tradition following the destruction of the Second Temple. In order to preserve the laws and traditions, they created the Mishnah. This creation took approximately 200 years. What came next was the Amoraim. And during the time of the Amoraim, the rabbis were creating, analyzing, discussing, explaining, and applying the laws from the Mishnah to their own day. And it's in this period of the Amoraim that we learn about a special woman, a special Amorah named Em. Now, for some, this could be her title, Mom, or it could be her name. And there are still other scholars who today doubt that she even existed, but she may have. It's certainly possible. In fact, there is a likelihood women were thought of during that time period as possessors of knowledge regarding gossip, amulets, folk remedies, and even some medical traditions. Of her, knowing who she may have been, She most likely was a woman of great knowledge, and the rabbis, if she did include her in the Talmud 17 different times. She is mentioned in the way that other rabbis are, with a quotation, with a specific formula. The formula is, Rabbi so-and-so states, M said to me. This then follows her advice or law. The most famous law comes from Ketuvot 50a, in which she describes and discusses the age of when it is appropriate for a boy or a girl to begin studying. In this case, M offered the exact time based on her experience with children when boys and girls should begin studying. And interestingly enough, her advice remains undisputed. The last story I want to share comes from the medieval period. Of the many women who existed, there is one woman whose name I wish to bring to light. Her death and posthumous preservation of her story by her famous husband, Rabbi Elazar of Worms, is how we actually come to know her. She was the one who supported him financially in their marriage. She ran a money-lending business. She raised their 3 children. And on top of that all, was a scholar in her own right. She offered public discourses about the Torah on Shabbat afternoons to the townspeople of Worms. She was fluent in Hebrew, mentored the women of Worms, was a leader of public prayer, and began a movement of women who could lead worship, entitled Forsayers or Frizogerens. She was murdered by crusaders in or near her home in the year 1196, and her name was Dulce of Worms. Even based on these stories, it is apparent that the lives of these powerful women were challenging. Each of them had their own story, their own voice, compressed and woven into a largely male-dominated tapestry of history. And what is striking is that no one woman had a singular path. All of them were authentic in their own voice and struck a note of bringing that divine into the world, which still rings through to today. I share with you these short vignettes of Jewish women. This is only a small attempt to honor our mothers, to whom we owe so much. As we read their stories, may we be inspired to honor our own mothers today, who have sacrificed, given, and striven to bring us to be our highest selves. These hidden figures taught us, and their memories remind us that we are all created in the divine image. As we collectively recall these women's gifts into the world, we honor our mothers who came before us by remembering them, by naming them out loud, teaching their stories, and bringing their gifts to life through our actions. May this Mother's Day be one full of grace, love, and joy.